Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the economics teleclass. In today's class, we'll be discussing about objectives of firms. You all know that we are doing Unit 3 topics. And as part of Unit 3 topics, we have been discussing about types and size of the businesses. We have also been discussing about how firms might be growing, internal growth as well as external growth. We have also discussed how to answer some of the merger related questions in our last session, right? So in today's class, it will be all about objectives of firms as part of the first topic that we'll be covering. So this is Aisha Miss from Mila International High School. What are the objectives of today's class? By the end of today's class, you should be able to explain three major objectives of firms. We will be mainly discussing about four objectives. Out of the four objectives, most important three objectives you should be able to explain. In addition to that, you also should be able to identify and explain cost and revenue related concepts that have been related with the these objectives. Apart from that, you also need to explain and draw diagrams related to the objectives. So you should be able to illustrate the objectives using relevant diagrams. So what are the important objectives? We'll be discussing about four major objectives. The first objective is profit maximization. We also have revenue maximization, then sales maximization, and we have profit satisficing. So these are the four major objectives that we'll be discussing. But out of the four major objectives, you should be able to explain the first three in detail. What is profit maximization? Profit maximization occurs at an output where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You might be wondering what is the output, right? First thing that you need to understand is you need to understand the concept of profit maximization. Profit maximization means it is the highest profit, the output where business will be or the firm will be enjoying highest amount of profit. In other words, we can say that it is the output where firm's total revenue will be highest and total cost will be lowest. So if I look into the profit figure, when firm's total revenue is at highest and total cost is at lowest, the firm will be able to get the maximum amount of profit, right? So that the output where the firm is able to enjoy the maximum amount of profit will also be the output where firm's marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You will be able to understand these things when we calculate and draw these graphs, so that in further parts of this lesson you will be able to understand. But before we move to the marginal revenue and marginal cost calculations, you should be able to understand the concept of marginal revenue and marginal cost, right? Because without knowing the basic concepts, you will not be able to go ahead. So what is marginal revenue? Marginal revenue means it is the additional revenue. What will be the additional revenue that a firm will be enjoying or earning because of an extra amount of units sold? For example, a firm has increased its sales from 1 unit to 2 units. So what will be the additional revenue? For example, when the firm is selling first unit, their total revenue is 20, and when the firm has increased its sales to 2, if the total revenue has increased to 40, what will be the additional revenue? So we can see that from 20 to 40, extra 20 is being increased when there is an additional sale of 1 unit, right? So that is something that you have to understand. So marginal revenue is additional revenue earned by selling an extra unit. Similarly, you also need to understand the marginal cost concept. What is a marginal cost? Marginal cost means it is the additional cost of producing 1 extra unit of output. When a firm has increased its production from 1 to 2, because of increase in this production, what is the total cost increase? What is the additional cost of that increase? Maybe in order to produce 1 unit, if a firm has used, if the total cost of the firm is 20, and if the second unit production total cost of the firm is 50, we can see that additional 30 has been increased, right? So that additional cost of producing 1 extra unit is known as marginal cost. There are actually two main formulas that you can use to calculate in the case of marginal revenue as well as marginal cost. Marginal revenue also can be calculated by using a formula changes in total revenue over the changes in output, or total revenue of the second unit minus total revenue of the first unit. Similarly, marginal cost also can be calculated by calculating the changes in the cost as well as the changes in output, or the difference, right? So once we are going ahead with the revenue as well as the other concepts, we'll be using formulas and we'll be discussing how to calculate that. The next objective is revenue maximization. Revenue maximization is when the marginal revenue is equal to zero. This time you should be able to understand the difference between profit maximization and revenue maximization. Remember that profit and revenue are two different things, right? Profit means it is the excess of total revenue over total cost. When you consider about the lowest cost and the highest amount of total revenue, the highest gap of profit that you enjoy is profit maximization. But sales revenue maximization is something else. Revenue maximization is the total amount of revenue, highest amount of revenue that you earn by selling an extra unit, right? So in this case, if I look into the concept of revenue maximization, you should understand that a firm's revenue will be maximum, or the highest amount, when a firm is enjoying the highest amount of total revenue. That will also be the output where firm's marginal revenue will be equal to zero. If you wanted to apply this to a given context, this theory is mainly applicable to companies where when they are trying to adopt divorce of ownership. You know that in limited companies, usually owners' objectives vary from the board of directors' objectives. So these things vary. So in the case, they might wanted to have sales maximization, and the others might want to have revenue maximization. So there can be changes. Firms' objective is not always to maximize profit. There can be situations where they might not bother about the cost calculation, but instead of that, they might think of increasing revenue. This time, their main aim will be to increase in revenue without considering cost. So remember that revenue maximization is when MR is equal to zero. Then there is a third objective. The third objective is sales maximization. Again, you should understand the difference. Revenue as well as sales, there's also a huge difference, right? Because if you are looking to the sales maximization is when the average cost of the firm is equal to average revenue. In other words, we can say that it is the break-even point. Break-even point means it is the point where total revenue is also equal to total cost. There will be no profit, no loss. It will be equal to zero, right? So what you need to understand is sales maximization. This time, their main aim will be to increase sales no matter what it happens. Not focusing on revenue, not focusing on profit, but they wanted to increase the sales of the output. For example, if you are thinking about the situation of sales maximization, you can apply this to a night market situation. In night market, towards to the end of the season, they would want to finish off the stock, right? So their main aim may be not to maximize profit or not to increase revenue, but to finish off the stock, which means to increase sales of the output. So you have to see that this time it might no longer be a profit or no loss, but when they can finish off the stock, then there can be break-even point or sales maximization. In other words, it can also be known as normal profit situation. Then we also have the fourth objective, which is profit satisficing. Profit satisficing will happen when ownership is separate from control. Again, this is also applicable to limited companies. If you are thinking about limited companies, in limited companies, shareholders are the owners, right? But shareholders' objectives might be varying from the board of directors or manager's objective. As you can see in this one, you can see that shareholders' main aim will be to increase profit. Their main goal is to maximize profit, but as manager's main aim might be to keep boss happy or enjoy work or maybe further expansion or maybe other objectives that they want. So always what you have to understand is if you are thinking about divorce of ownership, the ownership might be varying from the owner. If you are looking to the situation, owners are shareholders, but shareholders are not the people who will be actively running the business. But among the shareholders, they will be selecting board of directors or the managers. They will be dealing with that. So the objectives vary, right? So profit satisficing is also another objective. When we are looking to this diagram, this is a diagram which is showing all three objectives together. As you know that you have studied about profit maximization, you have studied about revenue maximization, you have also studied about sales maximization. So if you are looking to profit maximization, as I mentioned, profit maximization is a situation where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Let's analyze this diagram. When we are analyzing this diagram, you can see that profit maximization output. Remember that profit maximizing concept is something that you need to understand throughout this chapter, because when we start with different market structures like perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, for these things also you need to apply profit maximization concept, because to identify whether business is making loss or whether business is making profit or whether they are in a shutdown situation, all these things are playing very important roles. So profit maximization concept is an important concept. When you are looking to the profit maximization alternatives, you know that profit will be maximized in the output where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You know that this is an imperfect markets diagram, and I have shown a basic abnormal profit diagram here. Abnormal profit diagram means the revenue is greater than cost, right? So if I look into the profit maximization output, here will be the output where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. You can see that here there is a marginal cost, and then here we have marginal revenue curve which is labeled. So the profit maximization output is at output A. So OA will be the profit maximization output. At this output, when you are looking, you can see that revenue is derived from AR curve and cost is derived from AC curve. So here you can see that it is a typical abnormal profit diagram for an imperfect market. So you can see that profit maximization output is OA, right? Then what is the revenue maximization output? Firm's revenue. Firm's revenue highest output will be the output where marginal revenue is equal to 0. So marginal revenue curve is touching 0 at OB. So that means if I look into the gap between these, you can see that revenue is highest. Total revenue is highest. So this gap is the revenue maximization output. Then we also have sales maximization output. Sales maximization output is, again, as I mentioned, the output where average cost is equal to average revenue. So if you are looking to the output where this is the average cost curve, and here we have average revenue curve, and the output OC. OC is the output where normal profit is being shown, which is also identified as the sales maximization output where AR is equal to AC. So basically with this diagram, you should be able to understand three major objectives, that is profit maximization, sales maximization, as well as revenue maximization. But before we go into details of other things and to understand this profit maximization, revenue maximization, as well as sales maximization concept, you need to understand certain terminologies, right? So we will be discussing those terms in detail. So first part that we will be discussing is a revenue related concepts. So first, what is total revenue? As I mentioned previously, revenue and profit are two different things. Profit means excess of total revenue over total cost. What is the additional amount you have when you use the formula TR minus TC? That is known as profit. But revenue means amount of money that you earn by selling a product. So there's a formula where you can use to calculate total revenue, which is price multiplied by output sold, which is P multiplied by Q, right? So price multiplied by output or quantity. Then you also need to understand what is average revenue. Remember that the other term used for average revenue is price. Price per unit, average revenue per unit. It is same, because average revenue means revenue per unit sold. So if you are using the formula total revenue divided by the output, you can see that it is price or average revenue, right? Then there comes the marginal revenue one. Marginal revenue is an additional revenue from sales of an extra unit. So there is a formula where you can use marginal revenue of the second unit minus marginal revenue of the first unit. So if you use the formula, you will be able to understand this. But in case where revenue is changing for more than 1 unit, you cannot use this formula. In those situations, you have to use the formula where you are calculating changes in total revenue over the changes in output. So along with the calculations and the practices that you have been doing, you will be able to understand it. Now this is the calculation part where you can see in this table, you can clearly see that sales figures are given. That means output sold is given. Average revenue figures are also given. Average revenue here is also, in other terms, it is price. This time average revenue figure is constant, which is at 5. It has been throughout the period of sales. It has been, price has been kept at 5, which means this is also a situation where perfectly competitive firms price will be determined, because it will be changed, it will be staying same without any change. Now if you are looking to the figures which are being given, you can see that sales figures are given, price figures are given, at the same time total revenue is also given. So if total revenue is not given, you should be able to calculate total revenue, because sales is given and output price is also given. So 5 multiplied by 1, it is 5. 5 multiplied by 2, it is 10. So like that, with the help of formula, you can calculate. How to calculate marginal revenue? I told you that marginal revenue is always calculating the change between two outputs, right? So if you're calculating the change, you have to see when the firm is increasing sales of output from 1 to 2, what is the total revenue which has increased. So if you are looking to the total revenue increase, you can see that it has increased from 5 to 10. So the change is when the sales increase from 1 to 2, total revenue has also increased from 5 to 10, which means it is an additional 5, right? So 10 minus 5, it is 5. Similarly, when they increase from 2 to 3, from again 10 to 15, it has changed. So marginal revenue figure is constant here. The reason why marginal revenue figure is constant here at 5 is because average revenue is also 5. Average revenue is same, right? Now this is the graph which you can use for the total revenue curve. If you are looking to the total revenue for the given question, it is a constant total revenue curve, because price is moving at a constant level. So from 5 at output level 1, it is 5, output level 2, it is 10, output level 3, it is 15, and output level 4, it is 20, and output level 5, it is 25. So you can see throughout the change in output, it has been constant sloping curve, right? So this is an upward sloping curve, which you can show as a total revenue typical diagram. Then we also have another calculation part where you are given again average revenue as well as marginal revenue figures. This time you can see that average revenue figures are changing over the time, right? Remember that when you are looking to this situation, you have to understand certain important things. I told you one important concept, which is revenue maximization, in earlier part when I was discussing objectives, right? I told you that revenue maximization is the situation where firm's total revenue will be highest, but it will also be the situation where marginal revenue will be 0. So let's look at the situation of this table. If you are looking to these, sales figures are given from 1 to 10, and average revenue, this time price has been changing over the changes in output. So from 30, 27, like that, it has been changing. And you can see the total revenue figure is also changing, right? Now look at the important part of total revenue column as well as marginal revenue column. If I look into the total revenue column, you can see the highest total revenue. Firm's highest total revenue is at the output 5 and 6. When the output 5 and 6, if you are looking, you can see that total revenue is 90. In both output, it is 90. So now you are going to look at the marginal revenue column. Now you can see that revenue maximization is when total revenue is at highest level, right? So it is obvious that 90 is the maximum revenue that they have enjoyed. But you also need to see how to calculate on marginal revenue. As I mentioned, marginal revenue is always the change, right? So the change between two. So here from 30 to 54, it has changed 24 units. 54 to 72, it is changed to 18 units, and again it has changed to 12 units. So like that it has been moving, and at the output where total revenue was highest at 90, at output level from 5 to 6 when there was a change, marginal revenue has been 0. I told you that total revenue will be highest when at the output when marginal revenue is also 0. That is why when you are drawing marginal revenue line, you will be touching at 0 axis. Okay. Now this is the graph which has been shown, and you can see that if you are looking to this one, average revenue curve has been downward sloping and marginal revenue has also been shown. And you can see that marginal revenue is almost half of average revenue. And one important thing is here we have minus figures as well as plus figures which are given. As I mentioned, marginal revenue curve is touching at 0. So here among 5 to 6, this is the output where firm is getting highest revenue, but at this output MR is also 0. So that is one important thing that you have to understand. So here it has mentioned that average revenue and marginal revenue when price is falling. Two important points that you have to understand here is being identified. The average and marginal revenue falls as sales increases. So you can see that it is showing as a downward sloping demand curve. Then the average revenue curve is also a demand curve. You have to understand when we are trying to understand these concepts. In the case of a perfectly competitive firm, in perfectly competitive firm, average revenue, marginal revenue, demand, everything will be perfectly elastic because that will be the situation where price will be constant. But in second example that I have taken, it is a situation where price has been changing, right? So in that case, if the price has been changing, you can see that it will be just like a downward sloping demand curve. So downward sloping normal demand curve is being shown. So always remember that when you are studying about market structures also, AR is showing demand, or in other words, we can say it is price. But MR will be different in all the other situations except for perfect competition. In perfect competition, MR will also be AR curve, which is perfectly elastic. So here you can see that the average revenue curve is also the demand curve for the good when it shows the average price received at the level of sales. So you can see that both AR as well as MR curve has been downward sloping curve. So that's all that we will be discussing in today's class. Basically, in today's class, we have discussed about different types of objectives that firms will be enjoying: profit maximization, sales maximization, as well as revenue maximization. In our next class, we will be discussing about market structure related other concepts that can be related with cost as well as revenue. And in addition to that, law of diminishing returns will be discussed in next class. Till then, stay safe. Thank you so much.